Welcome to the Underground, the Steel City Underground, the black and gold standard for Pittsburgh Steelers coverage. Now, here are your hosts, Joe Kuzma and Brian E. Roach.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of the Steel City Underground podcast. My name is Joe Kuzma, and joining me today, usually, I have like some type of comparison that we would use between each other, and I thought of Friends here, Brian, Mr. Brian E. Roach, and the reason I thought of Friends is my wife watches it constantly. Never really the big show for me, but we were debating on who's who here, because technically my name's Joe, so I should be Joey, right? But you kind of said something different because I guess I don't have the inflection of your catchphrase, how you doing?
Right, you do it wrong. It's wrong. You have to be Chandler because that's how Chandler says, how you doing?
And you know what? Just some outtakes here for people who think we're out of our minds. I think we screwed up the intro to this show about 10 times and had to start over because Brian just kept making fun of my how you doing. And I'm like, I don't watch the show. I was never a big Friends person. Maybe that's a hot take. Maybe people will get the pitchforks and torches out. It'll be another thing besides the Browns and Bengals fans. And then we're going to tee off the Ravens fans today. And now I'm going to get the Friends fanatics. But I was telling you, I'm like, if there's a show that's on, I'm flipping through the guide like last night, and if there's anything if I see this show in the guide, I'm going to stop on it, much in the same way as the wife will throw, Friends on Netflix, even though I guess that's going away or something. That's a big to-do now, and they're still in the news. And, geez, they made $1 million per. You know what I mean? You talk about guys asking for money and, now Melvin Gordon and all these other things. Oh, there you go. The Steelers are the only team who have these type of drama. Well, hey, there you go. But anyways, even Friends, their cast had drama and got $1 million apiece per episode or whatever. But I was never the big Friends person. But Brian, I was trying to give you a guess as to what show I would stop on. It's not the dial anymore, I guess. Whatever. You remember TVs with of course you do. Remember the TVs with the dial. I was just talking about this the other day, and don't turn it too fast or you'll break it, and then you can't stop directly on like channel 21 or 22 or whatever. And then it comes in fuzzy if you're one way or the other. I think you remember those days. But
oh yeah,
I guess if you're going through the guide and I'm picking a show, another sitcom, greatest show of all time, maybe that's tough, but at least in the comedy realm, I'll take this show 10 times out of 10. I skip over Friends. The wife is the exact opposite, but I'm not even going to let you guess, give me Seinfeld 10 out of 10 times.
Clearly you think it's the season of airing grievances.
It's always the season of airing grievances. I nearly did that. I nearly said that like about a month ago. I forget which show we had, and there's a lot of people that they're airing their grievances with us, mainly Browns fans, Bengals fans. No, actually, there aren't any Bengals fans in there. And somebody was here. They're like, I'm just waiting for them to say that the Bengals and Ravens are fighting for the basement of the division. And I said, it's probably pretty valid because, today we're going to take a look at the Ravens. I don't think I'm going to compare the Ravens as much lineup-wise against everyone else and whether they improved or whatever. I could look at one position and tell you the reason why the Ravens may have struggles. And you know what? Every time I bet against Baltimore, I end up being wrong. And last season, they were like 4-5 when the Steelers beat them, and then in the second game in Week 9, and then all of a sudden they ended up winning the division, and everybody's like, well, that's just because Baltimore is good, and Harbaugh's a good coach, and Lamar Jackson is going to take over the universe. And I'm just like, I look at that position, I look at Lamar Jackson, then I look at what everyone else in the division has. I look at Ben Roethlisberger, I look at Andy Dalton, and then admittedly, we said that Baker Mayfield, we gave the nudge over Andy Dalton in the last show. So when you're talking about those three quarterbacks, and then you talk about Lamar Jackson, I think in the order that you may rank those quarterbacks is the way that I would see this playing out in the AFC North for the 2019 season.
That's my gut feeling. Look, I don't know yet what kind of a entity Lamar Jackson is going to be. I've read several articles about people looking at the Ravens and what they think they're going to do and how they're going to modify, if in fact they're going to modify what they did with Lamar Jackson last season. And the majority of people tend to think they won't. Now, that would translate to a running back-like workload of runs for Lamar Jackson over a full season, considering he had, 147 touches last year in not a full season of games. I don't know what that entity looks like in the NFL. I don't think Lamar Jackson is too small to absorb the kind of impact that would be. There are running backs that are smaller than Lamar Jackson, but it's tough to anticipate that. And how are the rules going to impact that when you've got a running quarterback of that to that extreme? Yeah, my instinct right now is to say, based on the quarterbacks, I see the Ravens being in the basement. And I cringe when I say it because of exactly what you said. John Harbaugh, I have great respect for John Harbaugh as a coach. I think he does some wonderful things. He finds ways to win. The team tends to win, but it normally relies on a very, very, very good defense. And I think that's a question this year in some ways, is whether the defense is going to be able to make up or pick up the slack if the offense does not provide the kind of explosiveness that they're going to need. Yes, it's a pass-happy league, and the Ravens are not going to, by all accounts, are not going to be a pass-happy team. They're going to be a run-heavy team, and I don't know. I don't know how that's going to work out. It'll be an interesting experiment to watch all season. I hate counting them out because it always seems like they're going to bite me in the butt when I do. But I just look at this division and I see the Ravens ending up somewhere near the bottom of it.
Yeah, and it's the tough thing. Immediately, we're going to get the trolls that are going to be like, "Well, Lamar Jackson went 6-1 as a starting quarterback." Yeah, but you know what? Let's take a look at that. He threw 5 touchdown passes, so he started 7 games and threw 5 touchdown passes in 7 games. That's not really conducive to a winning football team over 16 games. And I'm going to say that the Ravens defense, who I've been banging the drum on this for some time, and it's eventually got to come true, is that they're going to eventually going to unravel. And it felt that they were unraveling back, when Ray Lewis and Ed Reed and some of those guys left. But this looks like maybe the biggest impact, the biggest, change on that defense in several years, because they still ended up with some younger players. They ended up with some guys that were able to carry the load. A lot of that being in the secondary, a lot of that being, Terrell Suggs is still around, but no longer. And, and CJ Mosley, who they ended up getting at around the same time as Ryan Shazier. So, it's those things that, even though Joe Flacco, we always said wasn't elite as a quarterback, Harbaugh was always able to put it together somehow and be able to give Joe something where they were competitive in the division at the very least. And yep. You're talking about this too, and it's, I'm talking about it being a quarterback-driven league. It doesn't mean that I don't think Lamar Jackson can't manage games, but this reminds me of Tim Tebow, totally. This reminds me of a mobile quarterback who doesn't have the greatest accuracy, that they're going to have to kind of rally the troops around and try and fit an offense to work with it, because there's a lot of – we talk about question marks, okay? We talked about brand name versus, the great value generic brand or whatever. And the Ravens right now have a whole lot of, hey, we bought this stuff off the shelf and, we don't know what it is. We don't know if it's a brand as good as the brand name, or if this is a generic, or if this stuff's going to sit here and spoil too fast. There's so many questions. And my biggest one is, okay, I know they added Mark Ingram, okay, but Mark Ingram, what? Is he like 30 now? He's in the ballpark. Let me bring him up real quick just so I know for sure, because a lot of people are making a big deal about that. Oh, he's 29, so he turns 30 in December. 30 is like the wall for the running back position usually, and I understand he hasn't been a full-time running back primarily in the NFL, and he's almost always been a committee guy with the Saints, regardless of who was there, Kamara or someone else. And that's kind of, if he's used in that way in Baltimore, I think it could be a 1-2 punch, because I'm not too thoroughly impressed with Gus Edwards, to be completely honest. And, the guys they had before that, like Kenneth Kenneth Dixon and Alex Collins and that I was even less impressed with. So, I mean, while Gus Edwards is a little bit better, this is like, what is this, like a wishbone offense that they're going to be running? Because, I mean, Jackson led the team in carries, 147, and he wasn't even like the starter. They were bringing him in at times, and they had even Flacco on the field at the same time, and he ran for 5 touchdowns, and he almost led the team in rushing too. Now, Edwards had 718 yards. I'm going to surmise that he broke a few long ones as opposed to Jackson to have just a little bit more yards, 718 to 695 for Jackson. I mean, and he practically led to, Lamar Jackson practically led the team in rushing touchdowns. Alex Collins had 7, and I'm going to venture to guess here, if I do the breakdown on Alex Collins, that quite a few of those were, as Joe Flacco still is the starter. Yeah, for the most part, we're still into week 6? I mean, Jackson didn't really become the starter here. Let me see, until week 10. So Alex Collins touchdowns where he was leading his team, he didn't score a touchdown. I think he either got pulled or got hurt or something. But he didn't play past week 10, past their 10th game. And he didn't score any touchdowns, basically as Lamar Jackson was as like the starter there. So he's kind of out of the picture, I think. I think Mark Ingram's kind of their guy there. I think Mark Ingram is a little bit of an improvement. I think I'm going to say this way. The running back position is improved based on where the Ravens were entering the season last year, because we didn't know who Gus. I refuse to call him Gus the Bus. There's only one Bus, and that's Jerome Bettis.
Absolutely.
But Gus Edwards and Mark Ingram, I think that's an improvement. But when you're looking at this as Lamar Jackson and possibly being, like I said, what are they going to do? This guy's going to run the ball all the time. It becomes very one-dimensional. Now, is it a one-dimensional where you spy the quarterback and then they get away with some sneaky stuff? And I mean, the Tebow thing worked for 1 year, and they beat the Steelers in the playoffs with it and everything like that, and it was infectious. But I don't see this as being sustainable for not only Lamar Jackson's got to prove that he's an accurate quarterback, but I also see Mark Ingram as an aging player and not truly the answer in Baltimore, at least long term.
Yeah, no, I agree with that completely. Look, it'll be interesting to see how they manage this group of running backs, and I include, Lamar Jackson in that group. Gus Edwards. There's very often the case where a running back will have and find some success because they're little known. People don't know what their tendencies are. They don't know their running style, and they're sort of surprised by them. And then the second year, they disappear. There's a reason running backs have short shelf lives, and it's not just the damage that they take. It's once you kind of figure out what their tendencies are. A lot of times, when you're a mid-level running back, let's say, you just can't continue to compete. So they have what? They have 9,000 running. It's like tight ends. They have 9,000 running backs on their roster and 9,000 tight ends. It's a little crazy. So how are they going to mix this all up, and what are they going to do with it? I think it isn't going to surprise me if Harbaugh brings the split wing offense out and and runs a wishbone or runs something from the 50s that was run centric heavy, just to freak everybody out. Do I think it can win him some games? Probably it can win him some games. Do I think it can win him a lot of games? I don't know. I think once the league gets used to it, once they've seen it, and remember they saw it for at least half the season last year, we'll have to see what wrinkles he puts in it. Because I think what's going to happen is at some point Lamar Jackson is going to have to prove he can throw the ball. And, throw it accurately and throw it consistently. We didn't see that last season, but to be fair, he wasn't terribly given the opportunity to do so. So I think that's got to happen in order for this to be an offense that really can compete in the NFL. Could be wrong. I just don't see it. I think the way the league has moved, it is, it's interesting because there's a part of me, when we talk about Steelers defense a lot, in that we don't have those run-centric, 3-4 type defenses with a big run-stuffing nose tackle and all that. We don't. Most defenses do not have those play sets or those players in there. But the Steelers kind of have some guys they could mold into that, and they could, if they chose to, run a run-centric defense when they're playing the Ravens. It might be a little creaky because that's not going to be what they run the majority of the time anymore. But it's in their arsenal, and when you got guys like Dan McCullers and guys that can clog up the middle, you never know. And the Steelers have speed to get to the outside. So I just have a hard time seeing this as a successful strategy. But, we'll see. We'll see what happens when, Lamar Jackson drops back and throws 2-yard passes to tight ends who are cutting out of breaks. And, that becomes an extension of the run game, so to speak. And nothing is going beyond 10 yards downfield. How well that succeeds, I don't know. I just don't know. I look at this as the kind of experiment that somebody was going to have to run because of the way college quarterbacks play the game anymore. Mm-hmm. I just still don't know whether it's going to work.
Yeah, and definitely can't take away from Lamar Jackson's college career, but this is a pro game, and you talked about being a passing league, and are the Ravens trying to do something different that might work? Well, this kind of worked not too long ago. If you go back to 2012, and this was a team that we talked about before, the Washington Redskins, and just so happens that this gentleman's actually on the Ravens roster right now, RG3. Unfortunately got hurt and kind of faded from glory, but that rookie season that he had, this is just kind of crazy because I pulled up. It's hard to say because Lamar Jackson had 7 starts. So if I put Lamar Jackson 7 starts into the computer thing here and then project that over 16 games, this will be kind of funny, to be completely honest. But just to kind of give a compare and contrast, you have Lamar Jackson 7 starts, 58.23 completion percentage. He wasn't very good. In only 2 of those games was he 60 or better, and in the one that he was 68.42 was against the Bengals, and he only attempted 19 passes. So he's not throwing it a whole lot. By contrast, he carried the ball 26 times in that same game. In the only game he ran for 119 yards. The only game he eclipsed 100 yards. However, with the volume they had him running as a starting quarterback, this is not as a gadget to Joe Flacco earlier in the season. Brian, 7 games, he had 119 attempts, 556 yards, and 4 touchdowns. If you project that over 16 games, do you think a quarterback in the NFL can carry the ball 272 times for 1,271 yards and 9 TDs? I don't find that sustainable. If he was just a running back, possibly. But, just to put that in comparison with a full season from RG3, he had about half as many attempts his rookie year, 120 for 815 yards and 7 touchdowns. The difference here being RG3 threw a lot more attempts. He had 393 attempts, and he completed 65.6% of those for 3,200 yards, 20 touchdowns, 5 TDs. If you project Lamar Jackson into the same category, okay, he's about 30 attempts shorter at 361 as a projection, but it doesn't necessarily have his incompletions would be about a 151. It doesn't actually have the percentage here, but that's and 200. So he's less accurate than RG3, I guess is what I'm going to say. He may hover into that 60 range, which is where you want him to be, which was about this is based on the projection of 58% complete over his starts, of course, but far less yards, 2,546, 11 touchdowns, far less, and more interceptions with 7. So when a lot of people are thinking about the RG3 thing and whether this will work, kind of like the read option thing that was very popular, with that team too. If they try and bring this back, defenses figured it out the very next year, and they already have tape of Lamar Jackson right now, so they're already gearing up for this in 2019. I don't think this is going to catch anyone by surprise. And I also don't think that I don't know that I want the running back or the quarterback running 147 times in 16 games, let alone the volume that they're showing over a projection that would be 272 carries. That's absolutely crazy.
I can't argue with that. I just feel like as sturdy as look. You can run all that time in college. Why? Because at the college level, the people that you're playing against, while there is a certainly a top tier level of groups, it isn't the pro game, right? That everybody talks about it. There's a difference in speed. There's a difference in the violence of the hits in the game, and you've got now going from high school to college is one level, right? But going to college to pros, you've narrowed it down to where just the biggest, fastest, strongest guys are there, right? And trying to run a quarterback that much, even a quarterback with some solidity, to them, some, a decent sized quarterback, which Lamar Jackson is, it just seems fraught with peril. Now, I will say this: if he gets hurt, it's not like it was last year where you bring Joe Flacco back in and you have to reinvent the offense. He's gone, right? And RG3 is the backup. So you've got two guys who at least the offense probably stays the same. But RG3 right now is not RG3 when he came into the league. So, they're still in a weird position. If the center or the focal point of this offense fails somehow, gets hurt, gets dinged, even if he's just missing a couple games, tweak this or tweak that without a major injury that causes him to not be able to play, what are you going to do? I
have the answer. They drafted Trace McSorley in the 6th round.
Ah! There you go. Yeah, bring in the Penn Stater.
Hey, you never know, man. I mean, Tom Brady, stranger things have happened, but you take Lamar Jackson's frame. I mean, 6'2", 212. He could probably take a pro beating, as you were saying, and I'll let you continue here. But my main thought was, as you're saying this, is unlike a running back, he's got to raise his arm above shoulder, helmet, whatever level to toss the ball. And if he gets banged up and his arm's sore, then his completion percentage is going to be even more whacked than it is now.
Absolutely. There's really no question about that. I just don't know that this is a viable plan. And we'll have to see. We'll have to see how they figure out how they're going to manage it. This also carries back to their offensive line, right?
Yeah.
So we haven't talked about the O-line yet. But when you look at who they have, they've got Ronnie Stanley, Alex Lewis, Matt Skura, the oldest and probably the most standby guy in Marshall Yanda, and then Orlando Brown. Ronnie Stanley, solid left tackle. Orlando Brown may turn into a solid right tackle. The professor talked about him ad nauseum when they, prior to the draft, and said, game tape, he's a good player despite how horribly he performed at the combine. I think they've got a decent offensive line. They've got an offensive line that's going to be able to handle a run-heavy game, especially against most defenses that are no longer, like I said, run-centric. But I just don't know that that's the case in the AFC North as heavily, where you've got lines like the Browns line, lines like the Bengals line, and lines like the Steelers line.
3 of them, man. I mean, and even the front sevens, as much as we, kind of even ragged on certain things and tried to bring expectations down, all 3 of those teams have great front sevens for the most part. There are some real hosses up front.
Exactly. You're talking about, you got Wilkerson on the Browns, you got Geno Atkins in the Bengals, and you've got
Richardson.
Oh, Richardson. Yeah, Richardson. Sorry, forgot it. I mispronounced. But still, again, it's just you've got guys who have the potential to be run stuffers, to eat up blocks, to eat up linemen, and to free up the guys who need to chase down these guys to do so. So this is not the premier division to run this offense in my opinion. But again, we'll see. I don't know that they can make hay against anybody over the long term. As you said, people see this and they adjust to it. And now you've got, at some point in the season, Lamar Jackson is going to have to win the game with his arm, not with his legs. And I don't know that I have a lot of faith in that.
All great points. I wasn't even going to jump right to the offensive line yet, but you're there. And one of the things I wanted to talk about too was the number of starters changing. I mean, there's only seven returning starters on offense, 6 on defense. I mean, they have Justin Tucker and was it Sam Cook? Their kicker and punter are back, and they're going to need both of those guys, as they have. I mean, it's almost the formula of, when the Steelers had, Troy Polamalu making a big play or something, and they had to rely on, Jeff Reed or Sean Sweesham or someone to put it through the uprights until, they got Todd Haley in there and the offense really sparked. I mean, Bruce Arians had his moments, but you go back on some of those games. We even did this with the Charlie Batch comparison. Charlie Batch, great backup quarterback. No, very average, but the defense was so phenomenal. The defense bailed out with a pick 6, or at least got them in a position for a field goal, and that's been a lot of the Ravens' MO for the last few years, and that's going to be very tough to do. I mean, we're already talking about it. I mean, you mentioned like Richardson and Ogunjobi, and then they still have Myles Garrett, and they still, they have Olivier Vernon, and you go to the Bengals, and you have Geno Atkins and Carlos Dunlap and Sam Hubbard and Carl Lawson, and then the Steelers have, Jay Wobble, Cam Hayward, Stephon Tuitt, Dupree, and Watt. I mean, geez, oh man. I mean, even just looking at the Baltimore's gotten their offensive line kind of, I think, in better shape. I mean, Marshall Yanda is one of the top guards. Some people even put him ahead of DeCastro, which I don't agree with necessarily, or Zach Martin of the Dallas Cowboys for that matter. Orlando Brown could be a guy. Ronnie Stanley was a guy they invested in. Alex Lewis has been a starter for some time now. And then, Alex Lewis, they also drafted someone. Hold on a second. I got to go and look him up. So there's also, I'm sorry, let me see here. There's a Ben Powers too that was just drafted here in the 4th round that could factor into this as another guard as well. And so you have a couple guys that are like guard center, tackle. They have about 6 guys that they're playing around with, because Matt Skura actually this was my big question mark last year, was he was taking over, and I've already forgotten the gentleman's name that played prior to him. That was a long-time center there and got a big deal elsewhere. And he did a respectable job at the very least, but he comes in, he doesn't have the same type of pedigree. So Marshall Yanda's getting up there in age, and that's where this Ben Powers comes in. So it may even be Ben Powers and Alex Lewis, kind of vying for some time there. So they got somebody in reserve. I still think that, Orlando Brown and Ronnie Stanley could be their tackles, unless they move somebody around or shift something around. But at the same time, I think they're equipped. They may be better equipped than even... Would you agree with this, Brian? Do you like the Ravens offensive line better than the Browns or the Bengals, though?
Oh, yeah. There's not a question about it. I absolutely I do. I think they have the second best offensive line in the division. Okay,
great. That's kind of where good. But there's 5 guys, and then probably they're going to have to throw a bunch of tight ends on the field,
Oh, yeah.
Because you got to chip and double team or do whatever to slow down all of those defensive lines we were talking about. And if they start putting 8 in the box and Lamar Jackson can't, get the heat out of the kitchen by, throwing the ball, or they're going to have to do something, screen passes or whatever, to keep these guys on the outside or back them off the line of scrimmage, or it's going to be a long season. And I mean, I really don't know. And, I said about the amount of games they lost with starters, I think it was about a third. Because the names they lost, okay, Buck Allen wasn't really a starter. John Brown was. He started 15 games, appeared in all 16. Alex Collins is gone now as well. Michael Crabtree, gone. Flacco, gone. Ty Montgomery, gone. Zadarius Smith, we haven't gotten to the defense yet, but Zadarius Smith, Terrell Suggs, Brent Urban, and Eric Weddle, all starters, gone. And Max Williams, also gone, but they have plenty of tight ends, so I don't think that's... that's going to hurt them so much. And the biggest one, obviously, was C.J. Mosley. And we'll talk about their big additions here, but they didn't do a whole lot free agency-wise. I mean, Earl Thomas comes in, Mark Ingram, and then there's like Seth Roberts and Justin Bethel. And it's like, okay, well, Justin Bethel is going to be fighting for a roster position to begin with, as is Seth Roberts, because there's a lot of youth and stuff as we get over to the wide receivers and tight end groups. And this is what Flacco is going to have to do to back these guys off. Now, I got to say, Harbaugh's a Super Bowl winning coach. I like Harbaugh. He reminds me kind of Bill Cowher. Build the defense, Hasn't always had the best quarterback play during his tenure. I think we'll go back on this. Harbaugh's had better quarterback play than Cowher did for a lot of years. But, they're both, when you put him and Tomlin, they're both great coaches, and they're capable of getting stuff out of guys that you otherwise wouldn't think could be starters or contributors at an NFL level. And I just think that they got to do that on defense, and we're going to get there because there's a lot of question marks on the defense. But wide receivers, Willie Snead, I don't even know where do I even put Willie Snead in this category. It's hard to even go off of stats of what they did last year, and they didn't do a whole lot in many cases. When you look at Snead, he led the team in receptions. He had 62 receptions, 651 yards. He was only getting 10.5 yards per reception. It was a lot of short game where Flacco was, let's toss it down the field. And, a lot of times those guys didn't get the stats either because then the hanky came out and they got the pass interference calls. Crabtree was still a veteran guy, but guess what, Brian? 31 years of age.
Yeah.
So, his NFL days dwindling, and he turns 32 in September. So, it's one of those things. But he's not on the roster anymore. But at age 31, 54 receptions, 607 yards, only 3 touchdowns, and those are your top 2 guys. John Brown was stretching the field, and he was having some games. He actually, from a fantasy perspective, he was somebody that was somebody you throw in there as throw a dart at maybe, and he could get you a big game here or there. Some of that kind of went away with, Lamar Jackson, not so much maybe. But 2 of your top 3 wide receivers are gone. And you're going to have to deal with a guy like, Mark Andrews. Only, he appeared in 16 games. He had 34 catches, 552 yards. Who else? Hayden Hurst. He was banged up, but he only caught 13 balls last year.
Yeah.
Max Williams only caught 16, so I said they're not going to miss him. And then there was Nick Boyle, who it was like the big announcement, and it was like, hey, they re-signed Nick Boyle or whatever. And I'm like, what's going on with these guys? So when I look at this pass game, we haven't talked about all the rookies that they added. There were guys that we sort of liked. If the Steelers would have took these guys, we wouldn't really have any complaints, other than Marquise Brown is a small guy, but we've seen the small guy thing work and be very successful in Pittsburgh. But he's also fragile. And we don't know that Lamar Jackson could deliver a ball. He's going to throw it over the guy's head is a lot of the jokes going around. We also saw we were taking a look at Miles Boykin from Notre Dame. And who we didn't mention in the running back group was Justice Hill, was another guy we were looking at as opposed to Benny Snell. So we got to give some props there. That could be a guy that's in this mix in a committee and could be good too. So that's planning ahead, I think, for Mark Ingram's age. Ingram maybe a year or 2 in Baltimore, and perhaps we'll see what goes on there. But Marquise Hollywood, right? He's the Hollywood guy.
He's Hollywood.
Yep, Oklahoma, and Miles Boykin, and there's a lot of questions there. And there's Chris Moore, who's a veteran. I don't know, did the rookies get on the field? We talk about how hard the rookies have as far as an uphill battle in the NFL getting on the field with some teams and instantly being dynamite. I think they doubled down at this position just to see if one or the other guy fails. If both work, great. I don't see both of them failing, but still, it's going to be all driven by Lamar Jackson. And I just don't know, when you piece all of this together, how this passing game is going to work for the Ravens.
Yeah, I think they've put themselves in a position where they're going to be very reliant on very young players, which is why I think the offense is going to be tight end centric for a while. I think Mark Andrews, Hayden Hurst, and Nick Boyle are going to get a lot of playing time. You're going to see a lot of 2 tight end sets. You're going to see those guys, I think, actually running out of slot and wide receiver positions, and they'll work guys in as they get to see what they have. If Miles Boykin turns into be a really good receiver, then they'll have a steal there. I liked Miles Boykin a lot. Antoine Wesley, I had interest in Leighton, and I guess they got him as a unrestricted. Was he a free agent?
College free agent? Yeah,
yeah. And I didn't want to sniff a Marquise Brown, not because of his association with Mr. Big Chest, but simply because I felt like
first round pick.
I didn't want to go there with that. I didn't want to have anything to do with a first round wide receiver. And I think he's a quality player. Don't get me wrong. I just wasn't what I would have wanted the Steelers to do, which I don't have a problem with not wanting them, the Steelers, to do that. But I kind of feel like it's going to be tough. I mean, again, a quarterback needs to develop chemistry with their receivers. Maybe Lamar Jackson gets some of that with the tight ends because he had them last season. Maybe he's got a little bit of that with Willie Snead. But the rest of this group, come on, he's got to figure it out. And I just see this being a tough. And we haven't talked to schedule yet, and to be honest, I haven't looked at it.
It's not very much different from the other two teams we talked about.
I'm sure. The beginning of the season, I feel like, is going to be a real tough haul for these guys. And maybe once they get in sync, maybe this offense will work. Maybe it will do what they need it to do. If it doesn't, it's going to be ugly, and they're going to have a top 10 draft pick.
Yeah.
But if it does, fine. Maybe they stay out of the basement. I just don't see them being a true competitive team for the division. And let me say this, because we got a comment from somebody who said, "Oh, you guys just assume the Steelers are going to win the North." It's not that we just assume the Steelers are going to win the North. I think it could conceivably be competitive, but if some of the teams that we look at go 8-8 and 7-9, or even 9-7, I think that it's not unlikely that the Steelers can get to 9-7, maybe 10-6, or higher, based on interdivision rivalries and what they're going to play and who they're going to play and when they're going to play them. So where they're going to play them. It's not just, we're homers, although we are homers and we don't make any bones about it.
No way. No way. First I've heard of this. But you make the great point, though, within the AFC North and having to play, there's 6 games everyone has to play. I don't see the Steelers anywhere under 4 wins within their own division. I'm sorry. I mean, whether they have a split with Cleveland finally, or a split with the Ravens, or it's pretty much kind of how it worked last year. And I know they missed the playoffs, but there were some of those games out of division that they completely just screwed up. It's going to have to take Roethlisberger throwing 3 to 5 interceptions in multiple games again in order for that kind of thing to happen. I think there's just too much weight put on replacing Antonio Brown. You don't even have to talk about replacing Le'Veon Bell. Le'Veon Bell's been gone. And, the biggest criticism the prior year, when you were still talking about killer bees and expecting Bell to be back and Steelers being a contender after, kind of flopping against the Jaguars in the playoff game the year before that and having a tremendously, a really good season, the big thing is that they still didn't get an inside linebacker, and now they have that. And Artie Burns didn't live up to the expectations and left a hole in that cornerback position, and they have filled that. And that's where we're coming from, a position here of saying, hey, look, the only thing they've lost really is Antonio Brown, and then you have all these gains. I look at the Ravens and I say they lost John Brown, C.J. Mosley, Alex Collins, Michael Crabtree, Flacco, Zadarius Smith, Terrell Suggs, Brent Urban, and Eric Weddle. And Eric Weddle may be replaced by Earl Thomas. Is Earl Thomas the same type of game-changing and, very where would you put Eric Weddle's awareness on the field at? If I was grading on Madden, he'd be probably 100%. I mean, the guy just had a nose for the football. He Polamalu-esque in a ways, you know what I mean? And, those guys are rare. And I don't know that Earl Thomas is necessarily cut from the same cloth, but he's definitely a top safety in the NFL. And we've given a lot of respect to the Ravens secondary in the past. And I guess I'll jump over to their secondary real quick here, Brian. As we bounce around, because this team is equipped to at least cover all of the passing games around the league. Whether or not the other teams bring it with the running games, I mean, we know Connor, we know Chubb, and we know Mixon. That's going to be something. It's going to be a challenge, I think, for this front seven for the Ravens D, and there's a lot of change there. But the secondary doesn't change a whole hell of a lot. Marlon Humphrey is a guy that originally I remember we were looking at, and and he's turning himself into maybe a cornerback one in the NFL. Jimmy Smith has always kind of played at that level. Tony Jefferson came over the previous year. He used to be teammates with Weddle and one of the Chargers safeties, and he's totally capable. And then they signed Earl Thomas to replace Weddle. And Earl Thomas is coming off of an injury, but I mean, you know, when you got some of these guys, you talk about brand names, and I think Earl Thomas is a brand name. And then there's some others here like Tavon Young that ends up kind of filling a role as a nickel guy. Oh, and then there's still Brandon Carr, who, you know, he started last year, and Jimmy Smith was in and out. They're 4 deep on the corners, and they have the safety, you know, play that's there. Unless there's an injury to their secondary, they could just throw a bunch of defensive backs on the field and call it a day. It's going to be tough. That's still going to be the tough part of the Ravens defense. Yeah,
there's no doubt about it. This is, I think, from the standpoint of the secondary, this is the best secondary in the North. You know, and I don't have a problem saying that. They've got the horses, but again, the change with who they've got up front can impact the secondary, because if you give, look, and I'm going to include pretty much all of them. If you give Andy Dalton and you give Ben Roethlisberger and you give why can't I remember his name now? The guy in Cleveland,
rhymes with Faker.
That doesn't help me. Baker. There you go. Baker Mayfield. If you give these guys time, they're going to find a way to beat you. All right.
Yeah.
You know, and that's going to be the key. You know, this is a great secondary, but it will break down if guys have 5-6 seconds to pass. So, you know, you just can't cover that long. And, you know, I guess the real question also is in the linebacking core, where, you know, they lost, what's his name to the Jets?
Mosley,
CJ Mosley. And can they cover as well as they once did from that standpoint? In other words, who's going to be the one that's picking up crossing tight ends? Who's going to be taking running backs out of the backfield? Who's going to be doing that? And are they going to be as capable as the guys they had there in the past? I don't know. This is a kind of a new look defense for the Ravens, because there's just a lot of new faces here.
I mean, they got, you know, when I'm looking at this, and they got Patrick Owasu and Matt Judon, and either of those guys have been, you know, capable. That's where it is, especially Judon. And Judon gets, you know, after the quarterback here or there too. You take a look at, you know, there are 2 guys now that I'm looking at the linebackers that I forgot to mention as additions, and I think they're, you know, these are shrewd free agent moves because they weren't necessarily big name signings. There's a veteran in Pernell McPhee, and also Shane Ray. And what the Ravens did sometimes was they just put Suggs over there and let him rush the passer constantly. It's almost kind of hybridish of a 3-4, you know what I mean? So, you know, he was almost, they should have just listed him as pass rusher. And I don't know if they'll do the same kind of thing with Shane Ray and McPhee, if they'll be like maybe the outside guys, or if you end up getting, well, I mean, Judon, I guess, is outside. I guess I meant to say you're looking inside, maybe their inside don't look all that strong either. But Kenny Young, I guess, you know, got his way on the field, and he played a year. We don't really know what he's doing. But anyways, you got Judon, you got Tyus Bowser, you got Pernell McPhee. And McPhee, I don't know if he's going to play on the line, if he's going to be kind of that edge guy. I said Bowser already. And then there was Tim Williams, who came over from Alabama. And that's where we're seeing like a lot of Ewan Prince, you know, he's another guy that was, you know, undrafted or whatever, just a free agent. These are a lot of young guys here. We don't really know, I think, Bowser a whole lot. I don't know if Tim Williams is ever going to ascend. I don't think that Shane Ray has ever lived up to the expectation. They also have, you know, a veteran there. They kind of do the same thing with the Steelers. You got young guys with potential, but they made sure they have some veterans there. And when I look at this overall group, as I'm tongue-tied and twisted and trying to fill in names with their, you know, the way they used to run the defense, defensive stuff there with Suggs, this is where it makes me uncomfortable to just necessarily write them off right away. But I'm also thinking to myself, well, if these guys don't fill in for their predecessors, I mean, you still have Brandon Williams up front if you go to the defensive line. You got Willie Henry, who got hurt last year. You have a rookie in Dalen Mack, who was taken in the 5th round, and then Chris Wormley. I mean, Zadarius Smith's out of there. Oh, and I forgot Michael Pierce as well. And there's two guys there with Williams and Pierce. You're just looking at maybe a third, and then whoever you may put on the side, whoever you may have like in that Suggs type role, or if they just abandon. I don't know exactly what they're going to end up doing there. This could end up working, or this could end up imploding greatly, because I don't necessarily know. A few years ago we thought this was going the same way. It was going to go south, and then all of a sudden Elvis Doomerville fell in their lap. And
right.
I don't put Elvis Doomerville and Shane Ray on the same type of playing field, nor do I put somebody like Pernell McPhee necessarily in there. So it's going to be interesting to see how they move some of these pieces around, and if they just have somebody that's like a dedicated kind of pass rusher, if they run like a traditional 3-4, or what the case is going to be when it comes to the Ravens defense. In fact, I shouldn't even really say a traditional 3-4, because as we know, they play a lot of sub package too, and that's the reason they have all the DBs.
Yeah, I think they are definitely, they were always going to give. The Steelers went through this a few years ago. They were going to go through some transitional period where the older guys like Suggs depart, and now they need younger guys. But it feels to me like they kind of went whole hog here, and I get it. I don't know that they ever thought C.J. Mosley was really going to leave. Like, I figured they thought we can keep him. Because it's not that common to see a guy leave that early, on a early contract, and it didn't work out. So then it just felt like kind of the defense sort of imploded in the sense of how many guys just went, nope, going elsewhere, and that's unusual. The Ravens had always done a good job of keeping their guys, so. It was going to be some kind of a measure of this where they were going to have to do a transition, but it almost feels like it's earlier than it should be. Mm-hmm. So it'll take time to see what they've got. I think it takes time for this unit to gel and play together. And whether the guys who are replacing the guys who are gone are as capable as those guys, that is yet to be seen.
Yeah.
So there are a lot of question marks here in my mind. And we just have to see how it goes, really.
Yeah.
There's not much else that anybody, I think, can do with them right now.
Well, they poached also Matthew Thomas, who off of the Steelers.
Yes, they did.
He's there in their camp. I mean, there's certainly a lot of linebackers here. It's going to be interesting to see who actually emerges out of all of this. And, if everyone's healthy, those front guys might be okay. I don't know if I mentioned Chris Wormley in all this too, but he got some playing time as well. So, I mean, it's all over. It's really all over the place. This team, I think they're just trying to find their way. And there may be another one of these seasons, and this may happen on the defensive side more than the offense, where there's maybe some changes midway through. And that's actually as you said, the parallels to the Steelers. Remember, Cam Hayward wasn't playing right away, and eventually he got on the field, and then he was entrenched, as they saw, as a starter when they saw that he can actually play. You know what I mean? He just wasn't given the opportunity. And there's opportunity here for some of these players, whether it be a second chance like a Shane Ray or a Pernell McPhee or someone like that, or some of these young guys that are coming up like a Tyus Bowser or something like that. So I kind of wanted to jump over, Brian, now to the schedule. I don't think we need to talk about their specialists since they're both excellent. I'll give them.
Yes, they are.
They're probably the best in the division. I mean, Boswell's got a lot of question marks there, and Cook's obviously a great punter too. Anytime I see, like, when they play the Ravens and I see these guys, like, I see a punter that's good, and I'm like, why can't our guy be like that sometimes? I mean, Barry's had his flashes and he's had his not so good times too, so I don't want to necessarily ragdoll him, but I'm looking at first 5 games, and there's 2 within the division. So, I mean, they go to Miami, they play Arizona, then they play at Kansas City, host the Browns, and then play at Heinz Field against the Steelers. And we'll go out to week 6 too, because then they got to play the Bengals and then travel in week 7 to the Seahawks before their bye week. Yowza. There may be a lot of excitement in the first 2 weeks because I don't know what the Dolphins and Cardinals are really going to field. And, they're a prepared coaching staff with the Ravens. They could be 2-0. And then it could easily fall to like 2-3, like in the next 3 weeks. I think Cleveland challenged them last year, but that's a home game. They play Kansas City. They challenged Kansas City last year too. So, and of course, they always give the Steelers fits. This is really up in the air for me as far as this part of their schedule. When you kick it out the rest of the way, they have a bye week to prepare and play primetime Sunday night against the Patriots. They play the Bengals, and then it's the Texans, Rams, 49ers. That's pretty a good clip there too. Bills and Jets. Don't know what those teams are going to be like yet this year. Don't know what they're going to look like by December. Then they finish out playing in Cleveland and then hosting the Steelers for the final game of the season. And, I think that's put there sometimes because they think, well, that could be like an AFC North type championship, whatever battle. And I don't know. I look at this and I'm struggling to see. I don't know where the 500 level could come in here. A lot of people think the Ravens could be in the basement. There's definitely some big games on this schedule. Where do you feel like that they're going to end up here? Because I think a lot of people are saying, well, it's between them and Cincinnati, and automatically Cleveland's either winning the division with Steelers second, or it's the other way around, Steelers winning with the Browns in second as the top 2 dogs in the AFC North.
Yeah, and we're going to learn a lot in the beginning of the season here. We're going to learn a lot about the Browns. We're going to learn about the Bengals. We're going to learn about the Steelers and the Ravens, and get a sense of how these teams have managed to really put themselves together. But the Ravens probably have, and I want to call it soft because it's not, but they have a slightly easier beginning to their schedule than pretty much anybody else in the division. At the Dolphins and the Cardinals in your first 2 games. The Dolphins, if they lose that game, that'll tell you everything you need to know about the Ravens this year. It just will. You would expect them to be 2-0 against going into Kansas City. I think it's up in the air. We have to see how they fare. Again, it's hard to look at this team and make the comparison of they handled Kansas City last year because they don't have the same guys. So I can't say just because all the great defensive guys they had last year managed to handle Kansas City that this year they're going to. We'll see. But it's in Kansas City, which is never an easy place to play. And then you got the Browns. You got at the Steelers, as you said. I can see them starting their first 7 games either 4-3 or 3-4. And again, but then out of the bye, you got the Patriots. And what's the deal with everybody getting the Patriots out of the bye except for us?
Yeah, I know, man. Talk about National Fixed League. Is it too early to say that yet? Can we blame?
Probably.
Can we blame Al River? Can we blame Al River on already?
Let's. The refs stink. Okay. The second half of the schedule, who do you got? You got the Texans, the 49ers, the Bills, and the Jets. That is a cushier second half than anybody else has, which is why some places claim the Ravens have the chance to walk away with the crown because their schedule is easier.
Yeah.
And, they're probably going to lose to the Rams, and they have that trip all the way out to L.A. in the middle of the schedule. But you just don't know. I look at this and I go, okay, I'm thrilled that the Steelers have the Ravens at the end of the season because we're usually playing our best ball, and I would much rather have that game be on our hands than be sitting in the stadium watching them play the Browns again.
And nothing,
if it comes down to that.
And nothing would make me happier is if the Ravens stink and the Steelers had everything sewn up and could sit their starters in Baltimore and then beat Baltimore with their backups. Wouldn't that be lovely?
That would be a dream come true.
Yeah.
But I mean, the schedule looks like it should keep them out of the basement. But my concerns about how they're going to play, who they're going to play, and whether Lamar Jackson can consistently win, keep me thinking 7-9 here, which may or may not be the very bottom, but it puts them in contention for the bottom.
That's a very tough one for me because I had the Browns at plus or minus. I would love to just say the Ravens would be a plus or minus 5, but I think I'm going to put them in the 6th category. I think the Bengals could be. That's really tough, man. And I think we're going to have another show on this because we're going to discuss whether or not the AFC North is the toughest division in the NFL, and it very well may be. So, yeah. But that's for another time and another topic. I don't want to get into that too far, but right now, just based on the quarterbacks, I'm going to stick with my position and say Ravens are the basement dweller. But there may only be a game or so separating most of these teams, really. I mean, if you go up and down it, let's say the Steelers won 10 games, which, if that wins them the division, then they're in. If they're not in the division lead, that doesn't guarantee anything.
Right.
The Browns could have, let's say, 9 wins. The Bengals could be 8-8, and the Ravens could be 7-9. That would be wild. But that means there's got to be a lot of 3 and 4 win teams elsewhere, and especially, around the NFL and on their schedules in order to do that. Those teams do exist, though. The Cardinals, Bills, and Dolphins are all on their schedules. So needless to say, this could happen. We'll be talking about this more in the near future. So for now, I just want to say, hey, Brian, thanks for joining me once again.
Always a pleasure. I look forward to the hate from Baltimore fans raining down upon our heads.
To quote a former WWE champion and big mega Hollywood star, Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson, just bring it. That's what I'm going to say. So, well, folks, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Even if you're not a Steelers fan, particularly, we still enjoy everyone's comments, and there's the thumb down all over on the Cleveland Browns thing, but that's all Browns fans, and we appreciate the Steelers fans having our back as well, because if it smells like a duck and it walks like a duck, it's probably a duck, and that's the way we see it. So, until next time, my name's Joe. His name's Brian. We encourage everyone to be safe, be good, and we'll catch you later.
We would like to thank you for listening and remind our listeners to follow us on social media and our website, www.steelcityunderground.com.